Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another tutorial by J.W. Tyler. This tutorial is going to be on the SoundRecorder. I'm going to call it YamNotAParrot. Our design goals are to use the SoundRecorder in a functional application. To those ends, we want to record sounds. We want to have a single button to record and stop the recording. We want to be able to list all the recordings, and we want to be able to select and play previous recordings. Our process for doing that is going to be to build a fairly simple user interface, and then to build the block logic. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 events we will handle, and you'll see that we will be able to fairly quickly build this. Our first task in the process is to build our user interface. So we're going to pull up App Inventor and start a new project. New project is going to be called YamNotAParrot. Once we have that, we're going to jump right in. Jump back to our design document. We're going to place some vertical and horizontal arrangements with the record button and center it. So let's go back in here. Let's get our arrangement. We'll start with a vertical arrangement. Inside that vertical arrangement, we're going to place a horizontal arrangement in which we're going to place a label as a buffer to center. And this is a good exercise for centering, because we want to center our button right in the middle of our screen. So we're going to add another label on the other side, and this method is the fill parent method. We're going to set all the containers width and height to fill parent. It's a very important step in doing this. We're going to set that horizontal arrangement container to fill parent as well, and the height to fill parent as well. Now we can set the components height and width property. Actually, we're just going to set the width property to fill parent, because that's all we really care about, is pushing that thing into the middle of the screen. So we're going to set the fill parent on both of those outside labels. And then of course we don't want that text for label default text in there, so we're going to remove the default text. And then we're going to change the size of our button. We want our button to be large and easy to use, so we're going to set it to 150 pixels by 150 pixels. That makes for a large button. And we want to call it, let's see, let's make it interesting. Not just simple old record. Let's say parrot head. And we'll change the size just to make it interesting. So there's our button. So we're already meeting one design goal, and that's a record button. To record sounds, we need to have that record button. So let's go back here. We know that we want to record, so that's here, but also we know we want to be able to select previously recorded sounds. So we're going to select the list picker and place it in here, and we're going to change that text to previous recordings. And this is our fairly basic interface. We're going to add one more element. This is mostly so you can see what happens. We're going to remove the text of this label. This label number 3 is actually going to be used to display the file path to the recorded sound. Now we need some non-visible elements. We need the tiny dB, because that's where we're going to store the path to all the previously recorded objects. We also need a player component to play the sounds we record back, and we will need the SoundRecorder component, which is under the not ready for prime time. So this is our very basic interface. I haven't renamed any of the components like I would normally do. I haven't added any media. I haven't set the pretty stuff like title, screen, etc., to save time. Oh, what the heck, will change YamNotAParrot. We'll put that in the title. Alright, we're going to switch right over to the blocks editor then. Let's quickly review our position in the process. We have a button for the record sounds. We have a way to list all the recordings with the list picker and to select and play the previous recordings. We have placed our list picker, our label, our sound recorder, our player, and our tiny DB. Now we're going over to the blocks and we're going to handle the screen 1 initialize event handler, which will test to see if there's anything in the tiny DB, and if there is, it will load it into a variable called var recordings. Alright, let's do that. We're going to switch over to the block handler and we're going to start type blocking here, the screen 1 initialize event. So there's the event handler. If what I'm doing is confusing, I'm actually using the keyboard to create the blocks as I need them. This is a little bit of an advanced way to handle this, but it is very efficient and very fast and allows you to create blocks quickly. So just a side note there. So we're going to use an if block. So we'll type block the word if and hit enter, and that snapped it in there. Now what we want to test is to make sure that when we attempt to pull something from the tiny DB, that there is not a null value. So I'm going to say if the tiny DB get value, and we're going to put the tag as recording. So we'll start a text block and then we'll say recordings. If when that value is pulled, and we're going to use another text block and we're going to leave it blank, null. So if attempting to pull that value is not null, then we want to set a variable to the contents of that tag. But first we need to define and declare that variable. So we're going to create the variable. We'll call it var recordings. And we're going to make that a list. And we'll set that aside. Now, if in fact there is something in the TinyDB, what do we want to do? We want to set var recordings to the contents of the TinyDB. Easiest way to type that get value is type a period, get value, comes right up, and then a text, and the tag we want to put is recordings. Okay, so if there is something in the TinyDB, then it will be loaded into the var recordings. The other thing we want to do is populate that list picker, right? So let's just start type blocking list picker 1. What do we want to do? We want to set the elements to. What do we want to set the elements to? We want to set the elements to that var recordings. So whatever is in that list. Alright, so that's the screen 1 event. We've got that all handled. Let's go back to our design document, see if we covered it all. So we're going to use according to the design document. Let me scroll out here a little bit. According to the design document, we needed to test if the TinyDB had any recordings. If it was in fact true, then there was recordings. Then we needed to load the list of variables. We've done that. Alright, now the button 1 click event handler, which is pretty straightforward. We're going to use var recordings to track var recording, and that's confusing. I don't like that. We're going to use var is recording instead. That's a little clearer and is less likely to be confused with var recordings. So we'll use var is recording as a boolean to track whether the sound recorder is recording. If it is recording, then when the button is clicked, we want to stop the recording. If it's not recording, then we want to start the recording. Also, anytime that button is clicked, we want to change the value of var recording to the opposite of whatever it currently is. So a nice little exercise here for us in how to make a toggle button, but also in how to track single state items. So let's go back over to our blocks editor. Wrong one. Let's go back to the blocks editor and let's start with the button 1 click event. So we're going to use type blocking again, the button one click event gets type blocked up, and because we know we're doing an if else kind of situation, it's real simple. The block we're going to use an if else, and because this variable we're going to use, let's define it right now. This is a new variable, and the variable is going to be var is recording, and we're going to populate that with a Boolean value of false. Because this is a Boolean value, we can use this plugged directly into a test, because the test wants to know here if something is true or false. So we can plug in var is recording right into that, and if it's true, the then do blocks will execute. If it is not true, then the else do blocks will execute. So if it is true that var is recording, what do we want to happen? We want the sound recorder to stop. So there's sound recorder 1 stop. That's what we want to happen. If it's not true, then we want it to start, and so we want to put in the sound recorder start. Whoops, not into then do. That's going to go into else do. What else did we say we wanted to happen? We wanted to change the value of the var is recording. So we're going to select that button one click event. We're going to type the var is recording 2, and we want that to be set to not whatever its current value is. So you see what's happening here? Depending on what the value, true or false, of is recording is, stop or start is called from the sound recorder. However, if the value is false, it will then be changed to whatever the opposite is, which is true. And the same is true of true to false. So a very handy way to throw that little semaphore flag on var is recording. Alright, so we've handled the button click event. We need to handle the next event in our little application here. Let's go back to our design document. We've handled the button one click event. We switched the value of our recording and started or stopped the recording. Now we need to handle the after sound recorded. So after the sound records, what are we going to do? We're going to add the file path of the sound we just recorded to the variable list. We're going to set the player source to that path so it can be played. We're also going to store that list variable in the tinydb, because we're going to add to the list. We want to store it in the tinydb so we can load it back in later. And we're going to reload the variable list into the list picker so that we can always pick the latest sounds. And we're going to set the label to display that file path just so we can see it with our eyeballs. It's always nicer. So we're going to go back over here, and I'm going to collapse these blocks here so they're not in our way. And we're going to type block the after sound recorded event. So I'll just start typing after sound, and that's all I need to type. I can hit enter, and there it is. Now I've noticed this happening a couple times with when I type block. The name block isn't populated in here. Two ways you can handle this. One of them is kind of buggy, I think. You can type a name block and call it sound and populate that. That actually didn't work the first time, and I had to do it again. So I don't know. Your mileage may vary. You may want to end up actually dragging this from the drawer. We're just going to try this and see if it works. We're going to call it sound. So what's the first thing we want to do? We want to add the sound that was just recorded to this variable var recordings list. So the first thing we're going to do is type block and add an items to the list. What list? Well, the list is going to be the var recordings. And what do we want to add? We want to add that sound value. You need to make sure it's the value block of the sound here. And the parameter of sound actually is only usable in this block. So if I were to take this value block and plug it somewhere else, it wouldn't work. It needs to be in this event handler. Alright, so what else did we say we wanted to do? We go back to that document. We want to set the player source path. So let's go back there and let's do that. We're going to select this outside event. We're going to type block source. Oh, we didn't want the report block. I type blocked too fast. Let's type block the correct thing, which is source 2. arrow keys. That works. Okay, so what do we want to set it to? Once again, we want to set that player 1 source to the path that's currently stored in that sound value block. So we're just going to snap that in there. There we go. Set the player 1 source to that new sound that was just recorded. Now we don't want to lose that data, so we actually want to use a store value block and store it using the tag recordings. What do we want to store? Once again, we're storing that path. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. We actually want to store the variable var recordings that we just updated. Because we updated it, we got to store it in TinyDB. Then let's repopulate that list picker. So we want to type the elements 2, and what do we want the updated var recordings variable. That's what we want that list picker to be. And then let's update the label. Label 3, text 2. What do we want it to? Once again, that path. So we've completely handled the sound recorder after the sound recorded event. Okay, let's go back and look at our design document to see where we're going. We've handled the after sound recorded event using the newly recorded sound path to populate the player. Actually, let's go down here and handle what happens when we stop recording event. Step number 5 here. This probably should be drug up here and should be number 4 rather than number 5. We'll handle the after picking event in just a minute. Let's handle the stopped recording. When the second stopped recording occurs, this event is thrown and this event is thrown. All of this will happen and the player will be started almost simultaneously. This does work. You can trust me on this. So we're going to use the stop recording event. Start type blocking stop recording. So there's the event handler. What do we want to do? We want to start the player. So actually I'm going to type player 1 start. That's pretty simple. So a sound is recorded, and the second we hit that button again, it plays the sound. So we hit the button the first time, and we hit this button the first time, and the recording starts. We hit it a second time, the recording stops, and the sound plays. And this list picker is populated with at all times from the beginning of the application starting till we add a new application. It's populated with the all the recordings. Alright, the only thing left for us to do is to handle that list picker, which allows us to select and play previously recorded sounds. So when you hit that list picker, you want to set the player source to the selected file path and then immediately play that sound. Alright, so let's go back to the blocks editor and set that up. We're going to type the after picking event. So we've got the after picking event. What do we want to happen in the after picking event? Well, we want to set the player source. So let's start typing source. We'll set the player 1 source to, and we're going to say list picker 1 selection. So we are setting the player source to list picker 1 selection, and then what do we want to do? We want to fire the player 1 play or start, and then we handle that event. So that's actually all of the events, and this is our fully functioning program here. Let's walk back through our design document and talk about what happens here. YamNotAParrot, we want to record sounds, we want a single button, and we want to list all the recordings and select and play previous recordings. Really straightforward. Our process was to create the interface, which we did, and then when the screen 1 started up, test to see if there's anything in the database. If there is, we load it into a list variable. And when the button is clicked, if a recording semaphore variable is true, we stop the recording. If it's false, we start the recording, and then we change the semaphore variable. After the sound is recording, we save that file path into the variable list. We save that variable list to the TinyDB so it can be retrieved the next time the program starts, and we display that. And we play the sound after the sound has stopped recording. And then the list picker, whenever a file path is selected, we play it. Obviously this is rough. There is a lot of room for improvement. One of the improvements that this application really needs, and I'm going to challenge you to do, is to change this button so that it indicates what's happened. Either change the text when the button is clicked to say recording or record, or change the color red to indicate recording, and then back to gray if it's not recording. You really need some feedback for your user. So that's the first challenge we're going to put on here for you to attempt. The first challenge is indicate that the recording is occurring. What's the other thing that could be done? Well, you'll see that the file paths are not friendly, so change the file path to some friendly file name. Now that would be a little more complex, but that's a challenge, an advanced challenge for some of you advanced app inventors out there. That's the entire source, guys, out there, and I'm going to leave you with a wish that let's open all these first. Let's expand them all and organize them so we can get one long pan. You could pause the video to look at these blocks if you need them. Guys, I hope you have a lot of luck. I know I haven't been releasing a lot of tutorials lately, but I'm wrapping up the book, and there'll be a lot of tutorials like this one in the book, along with a lot of explanation of all the components. Alright guys, good luck and happy inventing.